It can start off innocently enough, that sneaking suspicion that you don't deserve to be where you are. But if left unchecked, you might find yourself in a state of constant self-doubt, fear of failure, and even apathy. You're listening to Call the Juris Doctor, a podcast by the University of Cincinnati College of Law, where we call on alumni to ask their advice on how to get through law school and life. I'm your host, Katie Bachmeyer. Answering our call is Gibran Peña Porras from the class of 2019. Gibran currently serves as senior counsel at Great American Insurance Group. Originally from Juarez, Mexico, he earned dual degrees in accounting and finance from the University of Texas at El Paso before coming to Cincinnati Law. Gibran shares openly about how imposter syndrome has shown up for him before, during, and after law school, and how his relationship with it has evolved over time. While this is an important topic for current and prospective law students, it applies to all sorts of people. In fact, studies have found that a majority of people, especially high achievers, have felt like imposters at some point in their careers. Let's get to our call. Thank you so much for being here, Gibran.
Of course. Happy to be here.
So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit just to get us warmed up. I've got a quiz for you. Some of the questions don't have right answers, so they're just asking your opinion, no pressure.
Okay.
Which of these famous people have spoken publicly about their own imposter syndrome? Serena Williams, Tom Hanks, David Bowie, or Sonia Sotomayor?
Oh, wow. Is there no all of the above answer?
There is an all of the above if you'd like to choose that.
I have a feeling it would be all of the above for this one.
You are correct.
Nice. Okay.
True or false, imposter syndrome affects people from all demographics and backgrounds?
Absolutely true.
Yeah. Explain to an 8-year-old what imposter syndrome is.
Imposter syndrome is the belief that you do not belong where you are, where you do not deserve what you have, and you came about being where you are or having what you have by sheer luck or timing or another way that may not have been based on your hard work and skills.
That was awesome. Okay. Yeah. So this one you can kind of provide an answer that might be more of an opinion. No matter how you spin it, imposter syndrome is never a good thing. It's associated with anxiety, stress, depression, and leads to failure or fear of success.
In my opinion, I disagree. I think imposter syndrome is a bad thing if you let it drive your actions. Because in my opinion, imposter syndrome is a psychological effect of you recognizing that you don't know everything. It's an absolutist statement, and I tend to disagree with those, but I think it really is only a bad thing if you believe it and you let it kind of drive your actions or inaction.
Next question. Do you ever get over imposter syndrome, or are you ever cured once you've had it?
I don't think so, because at least in the practice of law, I don't think you get to a point where you know everything. If you are someone who's always striving to learn and get better at what you do, I think there is some sort of imposter syndrome always in the horizon, because it's going to be something you don't know, right? And that's why I don't see imposter syndrome as something completely negative, even though there's negative components to it. I see it more as a reflection of you acknowledging in your self-awareness that you don't know everything. When you're focusing on what you don't know, that's when you feel that imposter syndrome, but it doesn't mean you can't get through it. So that's kind of my take on that.
So something that you shared with me is that you attribute part of your success to the opportunities you've been given. One of those first opportunities you named was as a first year in law school when you reached out to the League for United Latin American Citizens. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me what happened when you got on the phone with the president at the time?
Yeah, absolutely. So the triggering event for this was when I became the president for LAWSA, the Latino Law Student Association at UC. And when I became president, I was thinking of ways in which we could get involved. So I reached out to several organizations. One of them was LULAC, the president reached out to me and said, hey, why don't we go get a coffee? So we got a coffee. We were just sitting down and chatting. And it was interesting because there was really no agenda when I introduced myself to her and we were just chatting. Her name is Carla Boldry. And I was just telling her, hey, Carla, I'm relatively new to the city. I just became the president of this organization. And we wanted to put ourselves out there and connect with the community. And if there's anything that we can do for you, we just want to put ourselves here at your service. And that was really it. That was really the conversation that I had with her. That then spiraled. And that same June, when she reached out to me and said, hey, and it was great meeting you. I'm putting this together and I wanted to see if you guys would be willing to do a presentation on business legal entities in Spanish for this project that I have going on. And so essentially she was taking me up on the offer to put herself on her service. And she was like, yeah, can you guys do this?
Can you walk me through exactly what the offer, the invitation was? And you said you were rising to L, so it was the summer of your 1L year. Walk me through what that invitation was from her. What was she asking you to do and your qualifications at the time?
Yeah, so what she was asking was, she was saying that the Latino Entrepreneur Academy walks the students of the cohort through a number of weeks where they would have sessions. For example, the first couple sessions was like the foundation. So her question at the time, at least for my part of it, has been an overview of the different legal entities that are out there and the advantages and disadvantages of each of them, including how do you set them up. And it kind of like helps them see what may or may not be best for their business. It was just, hey, we have this thing. And someone gave a presentation in Spanish about this basic concept on business law.
And you were all of a sudden pegged as the legal expert
yeah,
on the team.
Yeah. And this brings me back to the second part of your question. What kind of credentials did you have? Like none. I mean, the credential that I had was that I was going to law school. And this normally these topics are handled by lawyers, business lawyers to be exact. So I guess I was one step ahead of where like the rest of these entrepreneurs were. But yeah, once they yes, I reached out to at the time the professor who was the director of the Entrepreneurship and Community Development Clinic, the ECDC, was Professor Lou Goldfarb, and said, Professor, I'm a rising 2L, interested in doing this. And I gave him a little bit of my story and asked if we could do this. Is this something that you think we could make happen? And he was 100% on board from the get-go. So we got together. He kind of like gave me a crash course, very introductory. So we created the presentation in Spanish, and sure enough, we showed up the first year to present. People seem to be very receptive to it. And we have been doing it now for, I think, 8 years.
At any point, did you sort of have this thought of like, oh no, they're going to figure out that I don't know what I'm talking about? Or did you feel at any point that maybe you weren't prepared for this?
So I've always enjoyed public speaking. And I tell anybody who asks me this, I'm like, I enjoy public speaking if I know what I'm talking about. Then I feel comfortable doing it. At that point, I understood the basics. I understood what I was presenting, but anything outside of that realm, anything outside of that perimeter, I did not know. And obviously, when you present people a topic, they will find ways to connect it to their own situation. And then they ask a follow-up question. Once they asked the question, I was like, okay, this is going to derail. So I was very quick to any time. I was very afraid of questions, period.
Just real quick, when you're feeling that fear of those questions, then what is going on in your mind? What are you afraid of?
I think at that point, the fear is precisely what you said. It's like, oh, these people are going to ask me a question. The question is probably going to be a very reasonable question that someone in my position should know. And I'm not going to know, and I'm going to freeze. Or I'm going to stutter, or I'm going to equivocate in my answer, and they're going to know that I really don't know what I'm talking about. So that really was the fear. Now, there's a component of it where we tell them at the outset, one, this is not legal advice. Two, I'm a law school student. So there needs to be a licensed attorney here, and he's right there, right? So there was a little bit of hedging right at the beginning where I was like, hey, I'm just the messenger, essentially. I'm a law student. But nevertheless, as soon as you start kind of presenting this information, you start positioning yourself as some sort of an expert. So people then start forming that idea in their heads. And my fear was that when they ask me a question and I equivocate on the answer, like this image of whatever image of expertise I may have is going to come crumbling down.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to your beginning of law school.
It sounded like it was a chance for you to sort of have a clean slate going to law school after undergrad. You had taken a little bit of a gap and you worked for an insurance company and you were in a band and you even like started a vegan food truck in El Paso at one point. And it sounds like it was always something in the back of your mind, but you almost didn't go to law school. Can you tell me where you were in your life at the time that you decided to take your LSAT and your thought process that you had when applying to law school?
So I was in El Paso, and when I went to undergrad, I was always of the school of thought that valued attitude above aptitude. So I always believed that your attitude would get you wherever you wanted to go, even more so than your skills. I was smart enough that I could show up to class and then the material, enough of it would stick that I could pass an exam, but I was very lazy. So I wouldn't actually work on the assignments. And obviously, the assignments are also a big part of your grade. So it was a very dangerous belief to hold at the time. All this to say that my undergrad GPA is because there's no changing it. It's atrocious. But I was okay with that because the bulk of my undergrad, I was working for an insurance brokerage. So at the time, I was like, well, I have this career here. And while all this is happening, I had a couple of friends who were going to law school, and we would just every now and then kind of check in and chat. And I told my friend, I'm like, hey, how's the law school going? Oh, it's great, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, I'm very excited for you. I feel like that is like a frustrated career for me. She's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, I told her my GPA is so bad. And she's like, well, my GPA is probably just as bad. And I'm still going to law school. So I think there's still a chance for you to go. I mean, that's not an impediment, essentially. And that just planted a seed of an idea in me. So I was like, you know what? It is what it is. I'm going to apply and see. It only became real when I got an offer by a couple of schools. And I decided I'm going to take one of these offers, that one being UC Law. Because of my history with undergrad and how, my family obviously was not oblivious to my grades. So when I told them I wanted to go to law school, there were a couple who were like, are you sure? Like, you want to do this? Because law school is not easy. And I was like, I think I am. And credit to my family is the second I said I am and I think I want to do it, they were 100% behind me. Luckily, I was able to repay that in a good, successful law school career. But yeah, it just it's one of those things where I just sort of decided to do it later in life. And when I look back at it now, I think once I did, I never looked back.
When you speak about your family, questioning it for a moment, your family, your mom earned her master's degree, was an assistant principal equivalent, and your father's an OBGYN. So you come from a high achieving family background. Did they pressure you at all growing up to become a high achiever, or was the narrative more like, Gibran, he's just sort of a free spirit, he's going to do what he wants? Which of those do you think would have been the perception your family had of you if one of those fits?
I think that growing up, there was that pressure of being a high achiever. Probably think maybe all the way through middle school. But then once I got into the latter parts of middle school, you're a teenager. So you start questioning authority and doing some crazy stuff. I think that is what kind of things derailed the strictness and the oversight of my family or the pressure to achieve kind of went away. And in the end, my GPA obviously suffered from that lack of structure. When I went to law school and decided to go to law school, I was self-aware. I was not lost on me that my grades were nothing to brag about. So I took the opportunity to go to law school as a blank slate for me to prove to myself and my family that what I didn't achieve academically in undergrad was not because I couldn't, but because I was lazy and I was just focused on something else.
Right. And so that's really interesting because it makes me wonder if then in times where you're sort of doubting your abilities, maybe the past comes back to haunt you a little bit, or those voices from your family members who are maybe doubting, like, can he really do this? Starts to maybe creep in and you think maybe they're right.
Yeah, I mean, there's times, not so much now. I think at the time in law school, you're scared. It's a new environment. It's a forced curve, so there's only so many A's, so many B's to go around. And you are like, am I built for this. You're surrounded by very smart people, but then you realize, well, that's the case everywhere. You could go anywhere in the city and there's going to be smart people and people who are successful. The healthiest part for me was learning to compete with myself and not play the comparison game. And to this day, that's something that I live by. It allows me to celebrate other people's successes without thinking, well, if they're successful, I'm not going to be. Right? It's more like you got to be better than last year. That's all there is.
I like that idea of competing against yourself. It's easy to compare ourselves to others, especially in law school when there's that Socratic method class environment, and you really are competing for grades with other students. But you were able to achieve different awards and accolades throughout your time, including for your law review article, you won the Norbert Henshiner Essay Prize for Best Comment, the Lois Rosenthal Award as a fellow for the Ohio Innocence Project. In 2017, you were awarded the Frost Brown Todd Diversity Scholarship, and you were also on the selection committee for the dean. And then you graduated with honors, right? So even with all of that, it sounds like at different times, at various times, you doubted your abilities and wondered if this was right for you or felt impostery. But I'm just wondering, at any point in these achievements, were you able to really like internalize, okay, I did this good thing, and really let it soak in?
Yeah, I think it probably happened. So all these, just for context, all these awards except the Frost Brown Todd Diversity one, none of those I was expecting, and they all came as a surprise. There was a number of awards. I wasn't just the only one, but when they announced it, I was like, wait, what? They say my name, and then so I was not expecting it. To a point, I was embarrassed because my name kept coming up, like it was so and so, and then so and so, and then Gibran, and then so and so, and then Gibran. And I'm like, oh my god, this is a little embarrassing. I think maybe the day after or the week after, when I sat down and I was like, wow, this is like super cool, right? I felt really honored to have received all those things. I think there's a difference between saying I deserve it, I earned it, and saying, oh, that's cool that the work that I put in resulted in this, right? Because when I didn't even know these awards existed. So I was putting in the work and I was doing the best I could do at the time, even with my love for procrastination. I was like, I'm going to put in the work. And so I wasn't doing it to get an award. It was like so unexpected that I don't think I ever had the chance where I was like, nice, this is what I was working for.
You said you felt embarrassed. Can you tell me kind of like, what do you mean you felt embarrassed?
Well, and it was embarrassing there, like then and there. So we were going to the ceremony because it was a school event and our friends were happy to go, but also because I advocated at the time for Professor Goldfarb to get an award for teaching excellence, and we wanted to see him get the award. So we sat down, there was a stage, and we sat down literally in front of the stage, and then they start coming up with awards, and my name starts coming up, and I was embarrassed because like, what do I do? Like, what do you do with your hands when you're like, oh, wow, thank you. Like, I wasn't expecting it. So you just hear your name and people start clapping, and then you don't know what to do with yourself, right? That's really the embarrassing piece of it. I couldn't help my expressive face to laugh and be like, oh, thank you. This is awesome.
Yeah, like the emotion was right there. The feelings that you had were right there on the surface for you, and you couldn't just play it cool. It's reminding me of that quote, good luck comes to those who work hard, right? That it just sort of like, I don't know how that's happened. It's like, well, you put in all the work. You would imagine that after all of the things we just talked about, on paper and from an outsider's perspective, you're a very accomplished law student. And today now as a lawyer, you have a prestigious career. You're doing business law as you had hoped, right? Working for an insurance company that serves 50 different states. But you had said at the beginning that you don't think imposter syndrome is something we ever really cure. Can you share how it shows up for you today?
Yeah, of course. And it's interesting because as I'm hearing you ask the question, it just shows to me the fact that imposter syndrome never goes away, because I even feel like I want to take an issue with the statement that I'm a very accomplished lawyer, right? Perhaps, relatively speaking, I am, but I don't consider if someone says introduce yourself, I'm like, I'm a very accomplished lawyer, right? I don't introduce myself that way, which if we look at it objectively, I have accomplished things, right? But it's like when people have an issue accepting a compliment, right? So I don't believe you cure imposter syndrome, because there are many things that I do with this company that when I started working with them, I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And then you learn about it and you kind of work through it. And then you talk to your mentors and then you talk to your colleagues. And then you're able to kind of be like, okay, now I understand it. Then when that issue comes up again, you understand it. And then turns out they ask you something else. And you're like, well, I don't know that. So then there's always something else that you don't know. People may say, Gibran is a great lawyer. And I may never call myself that because I know there's many things I don't know. And I think that is attributable to imposter syndrome. It doesn't mean that I don't feel capable of finding the answer. But if someone goes and tells me, oh, go Gibran, he'll know it. I'll be like, I don't know that I will know it, right? But I can find out.
So how do you find that out? Or like, do you worry about having to ask those questions?
Not anymore. I've been on both sides of the table, right? So I've been an intern and a baby lawyer. And then I've been on the other side, someone who hires interns and baby lawyers. When I was an intern, I think I was afraid to ask questions. I was very lucky and still very lucky to work with people who are always been very collegiate and always been super supportive. So you lose the fear of asking questions. Now, as someone who hires interns and baby lawyers, you expect them and want them to ask questions because that's how you learn. How you find out answers to questions you don't have. I think that's really what law school is. They teach you how to take information from your clients, understand the precision, understand the fact patterns, and then use that to know where to find the answers for them.
So post law school, it looks like it's pretty similar. It's just like you have a different set of knowledge now that you know, and there's a different set of knowledge that you need to know.
Right, exactly. That's why I think that imposter syndrome never really goes away, because there's always going to be something you don't know. Essentially, you're just moving the goalpost where the imposter syndrome appears.
I want to go into the difference between what you've talked about with it not being an illness, but it's just a mindset. And there's evidence that imposter syndrome can be both that mindset individually, but also it can be a result of an environment that is exclusionary or intolerant. So were there ever any messages given to you, particularly concerning your identity as an immigrant or Latino, that might have contributed to your own feelings or doubts, just sort of being reinforced by low societal expectations or narratives?
I don't think so. I recognize that in my life I've been in a privileged position where I have not had to deal with a lot of questioning on what I can or cannot do because of my immigration status or my heritage. Any instances of imposter syndrome that I felt have really been just the test of my abilities at the time, but not in any way related or connected to my identity.
And just for those listeners who may have felt that way or have had that experience, what would you want them to know?
And obviously I'm speaking from a different position that I haven't been in, so I don't presume to speak for people who have suffered it. Something really important that I think helps in that regard is having a support system. If I ever had an inkling of crippling doubt or fear, the type of fear and doubt that really paralyzes you, it was super helpful for me to have a good support system, and that support system is in the friends that I made. I also was close with a couple professors, and they are really good at taking you out of the ledge because they can see it from a third party perspective as a spectator. That's one thing. The other thing is, I feel like imposter syndrome is something that you fight against with confidence, but you don't get confidence unless you do. You can read all the books about how to ride a bicycle. You can watch all the videos about how to ride a bicycle. You're never going to know how to ride a bicycle if you don't get on the bicycle and start pedaling. When I think imposter syndrome is a bad thing is when you believe that imposter syndrome is what you're feeling as imposter syndrome is correct and you don't act on it. So someone who has, that would be my advice. If someone came to me and said, hey, I'm feeling this and that, I would look for a support system and I would try to convey the message that, one, you don't need to believe imposter syndrome. Just because you feel it doesn't mean it's true. You don't need to let it dictate what you do or what you don't do.
Well, I want to make sure we get to some student questions. We had some law students from the Cincinnati College of Law submit questions about imposter syndrome that they wanted to pose to you. So,
okay, sure.
Lana, who is a 3L, she's interested in IP law, asks, Looking back, were there moments where imposter syndrome actually pushed you to grow rather than just holding you back?
Yes, I've always been someone who seeks to be a small fish in a big pond. And I feel like imposter syndrome kind of goes hand in hand with that, because you're like, well, when I first started working at Great American, for example, you're surrounded with like people who are very, very smart. They have a lot of expertise, and it's very impressive, and it's also intimidating, right? So you get imposter syndrome almost on the spot, where you're like, oh shoot, I'm rubbing elbows with people who are way more experienced. They're super smart. They went to these crazy great law schools. They had these crazy great careers before they came to Great American. I just got out of law school, and that's when you feel that imposter syndrome. But one positive thing that does, if you don't let it cripple you, what it will do is when you're that small fish in the big pond, it will elevate your work product, because you try to emulate what your peers are doing. But it's a fine line between doing that and comparing yourself to others. You're not in the same position as other people are. What you're trying to do is you're trying to contribute your piece to the larger environment. So yeah, that's a practice in learning. I think you'll find several opportunities to see that what causes you imposter syndrome is what almost drives you to be better.
Adam, who is a 3L as well, is interested in transactional law, and he asks, when did you start to feel like a lawyer? Did you ever feel like you're just playing a role? And if you did, how long did it take for you to really overcome that so that you felt like you were a good lawyer? And what does it look like to be a good lawyer?
Well, I think what does it take to be a good lawyer is probably a question that would take us another hour and a half. But I'll try to answer it at the end. When I felt like a lawyer was, you get your offer, you are officially a lawyer, and then you start getting questions directed at you. You kind of start feeling like a lawyer, but the feeling like a lawyer at the beginning is not necessarily a good thing. It's like, oh shoot, wait, I'm the lawyer, so I'm supposed to get this answer for them. So then you put a lot of work and you go straight to Westlaw or Lexus, and you're like, all right, let me find this out. And then you put over all this, and you're like, okay, I think this is the answer. And then you give it to them. Or maybe you go to your supervisor, you're like, hey, this is what I think about this. And they're like, yeah, that makes sense. Great. And then you go back and issue the answer, and they're like, awesome, thank you so much. And then you're like, oh, wait, okay, so then I was a lawyer here. I acted as a lawyer. And I think it took me probably a good year before I felt more comfortable, being the lawyer. At the beginning, almost any single matter that comes to you, you haven't experienced before. So the imposter syndrome comes in. It's like, oh, well, now you don't know this. You also don't know this. You also don't know that. Whereas now, for example, I get 50 emails in one day. I probably will not know or not be 100% sure on 10 of them, 15 of them. So I think it's going to vary depending on who you talk to. But I think for me, it was about a good year of solid practice that I was like, okay, I know how to find answers, even if I don't know the answer. I know how to find them. I feel comfortable with it. And then people reach out to you with random fact patterns, which honestly keeps things interesting.
That seems like a really reassuring answer for Adam. I hope he appreciates that. A year doesn't seem too long. Robbie, who's a 2L interested in real estate law, says, I did not start my law school career with good grades. This caused me to develop quite a bit of imposter syndrome going into this semester. Even though I did well at my summer job, I still questioned my intelligence and whether I was smart enough to be in law school. I would ask Gibran how they deal with or tackle imposter syndrome while working at a prestigious company. But I think it would be interesting for you to answer, just specifically to him. Do you have any advice for him or where he's at?
Yeah, I think that is, for a lot of people, the way law school is graded, it comes as a shock, especially if you come straight from undergrad, where you put in the work, you're going to get an A. That's not always the case in law school. In law school, like I mentioned, there's only so many A pluses to go around. There's only so many A's, so many A minuses, right? And sometimes that force curve comes as a shock. And I can understand how it could feel overwhelming, like, oh my God, I didn't do as well as I thought I was going to do. And that happened to me as well. I think if you did well on your job, definitely hold on to that, because grades, yeah, they're important depending on what you want to do. But you have to think also in terms of when I'm hiring people, I don't always go for the top of the class. You will interview them because you're curious and you want to know people and you want to get the best qualified candidate. But there's a lot of other aspects, both tangibles and intangibles, that come into a decision to hire someone. And so I think if you did well in your job, keep doing what you're doing. When it comes to school, it sounds like they did a lot better this time. I think if you can put yourself the goal of just be better than you were last semester, which is what I essentially became my goal when I first started, only comparing myself to myself and competing with myself.
Grades aren't everything. We know that.
That
It's hard to internalize. All right, last question here. Deanna, she's a 2L interested in entertainment and sports law, and she asks, how do you separate humility from shrinking yourself?
One, I love the area she wants to go into. It's super, super interesting. And that is a phenomenal question. Kind of connects to what I was telling you when you were talking about, you're an accomplished attorney. There's a distinction between being humble and not believing that you are enough, right? And that's something that I think anybody who has a preference for being humble will struggle with. So I think it's a balancing act. And it all has to do with how you talk to yourself. Because I think humility is easy, because I think humility comes from, it's almost like from here out, right? As I don't brag about X or Y, but that is different from myself talking, how I talk to myself and what I believe about what I can and cannot do. And it's something that doesn't come easy. Like it's something you practice every day. But there's times when I was like doing a lot of negative self-talk, like, oh, you're so dumb, you're so stupid. And then you realize that does have an impact on you, because the way you talk to yourself is what you start thinking and then believing and then doing. So I think when you're looking at humility versus making yourself smaller, is how you talk to yourself. That's what's going to make you smaller or bigger. What people say and how you talk to people about yourself is going to make you humble or not humble.
I would love to end with 5 good things.
All right.
Number 1, your favorite hangout spot in Cincinnati.
There's a couple. If I'm hanging out with friends, I think Matry is great. I also like Ryan Guys. Ryan Guys has a special place in my heart because that was the first place where I went out in Cincinnati. And that's where I also met with like 2 of my best friends. So actually 3 of them. So that's a special place in my heart, and it's still good. The rooftop is great. Matry, I think, is the ones we go to more frequently.
All right. Number 2, one of your go-to self-care tools.
One of my go-to self-care tools, I think it would be music. It can be as simple as just like listening to an album that I really like, or playing or just making music, like maybe grabbing a ukulele or grabbing a guitar and just kind of like messing with it, or just doing a little bit of music production on my computer. Music is a good way for me to think about nothing else but what is in front of me.
Your favorite course from law school?
Legal drafting. Aside from OIP, which I think is the best way for you to get a lot of experience in a very short amount of time, legal drafting, Professor Mangan, you get out of that class drafting almost as well, if not better, than a second-year associate in any law firm, especially if you want to do transactional stuff like I did. So I think that was probably by far one of my favorite classes.
Okay, controversial one, Skyline or Gold Star?
My answer is going to be probably controversial for the reasoning. I'm Team Skyline, because when I moved here, the people that I was hanging out with, they were like Team Skyline, and I was like, sure, okay, fine. Like, and then I tried Skyline, and I was like, well, Skyline kind of sucks too, man. Like, this is not real chili. I come from Texas. That's not chili.
Exactly.
So I'm just like Team Skyline on principle, really, just because that's kind of who I chose first. But I'm self-aware enough to know that my reasoning is not very valid.
That's totally how I choose sports teams too. So I get it.
Right.
I get it. Okay. Last one, number 5, one book or resource or tool that has helped you work with your imposter syndrome.
So this one didn't help me with my imposter syndrome because I read this book much later. But if someone needs it, I think it's a really good one. It's called Mindset by, I think, Carol Dweck.
Yes, you're
okay.
right.
Yeah, so I was able to connect really well with it because of that argument that she has in the book, or the principle of the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. And I think if you think about it in very simple terms, the fixed mindset is, and I know people like this, who you have a mindset where you're like, I don't want to look dumb. I want to appear intelligent. Everything has to be perfect. It's essentially the what will people say kind of mindset. Whereas the growth mindset, it sees failures as lessons. So you're not afraid to fail. You're not afraid to make mistakes. You're not afraid to look dumb. I'm not afraid to make a fool of myself. if it leads to growing. But I really like that dichotomy. And I feel like if I did not know anything about imposter syndrome, or if I was just experiencing it and was looking for ways to address it, or maybe understand and digest it in a way that can have a positive impact instead of a negative impact in my life, I think that would be a good book to get started with.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate everything, all your insights. I think it's going to be really helpful.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
Thank you for having me. I hope people find it helpful, and let me know if I can ever do anything else. One of my mentors, Tom Cooney, says I'll always take an opportunity to tell people what to do with their lives, and I feel that. So so I hope that people find this helpful.
To learn more, check out our show notes for today's episode. And if you'd like to submit a question for our next show, please call area code 513-549-7567 and leave your name, contact info, and a brief message. Of course, if you like this episode, feel free to subscribe and leave us a review. Till next time.